Alrighty, so this is the kind of look and layout that I want us to try to achieve today. Notice what I've got going on. I've got my composition of my figure. It's just one person. The photograph itself, is this a high or a low depth of field? Low. How do you know it's low? Blurry background. The reason why you want to have a blurry background is so you have enough contrast between this person who's nice, sharp, and in focus, and everything else in the background is out of focus. So when you have to go in and make selections and choose just her, it's a little bit easy. If everything was in focus, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Also notice I've got a bunch of different elements on here. If you look at my layers palette, I don't have a lot of different layers on here. You can kind of pick and figure out how I laid this out. If I turn off visibility of everything, we'll go down to the first layer. So I've got her by herself. What I did was I have to have a copy of her so that I can put things behind her and in front of her and give that illusion. So the first thing we'll do is once you have this photographic composition, I'll even turn this off, is to isolate just that person. Now, if you've never done this in Photoshop, it can be easy and it can be very tedious. I'm going to show you how to think about, especially things if you've got wisps of hair that can be a little bit more tedious. But once I have two different versions of her, I've got an isolated one where there's no background, and then I've got another layer, layer 2, so we'll call this the back image, and this would be our front image. Now that I have two different versions of her, especially once they're placed on top of each other, I can start to add things that give me that sense of depth. So when I add like a rectangle, I've got a rectangle that's behind her. Anything that's between the front image and the back image gives that sense that it's behind her. Pretty cool? That's the essence, that's the trick, the magic trick that we're working with. What I want to see for this one is we're going to add your name. I want the name to be behind you. Notice how if I've got Leah, I wouldn't want to place it like right here. The name, you know, it could easily be misread. Lee H, Lee, Liu. Give me an indication of what that letter may be. You can play around with colors, sizing, fonts, all that. What I'm showing you is just a very, very basic kind of thing. Let's see. Yep. As far as other things you can put behind her, what I want this to be is kind of a, I'm calling it a resume poster. I want you to list out any skills or interests that you have. You're going to work on your photograph, so this will be kind of a promotion for you. So the other things that I add to here, I've got a little plane that I can add some text to, so I added, there we are, the skills. No, I've already moved it. And there we are. List of skills that you may have. It could be interest, it could be whatever you want to put on here. I'll leave that up to you as far as the look and feel of it. Other things that go in front of her, so this could be your contact information. If I've got a rectangle that's in front, I can then place the text on top of it. This is the effect that I'm trying to achieve, just this sense of different planes, things behind your figure, things in front of your figure. Pretty cool? Okay, here's how we're going to set it up. We're going to make a new document, and for this document, I'm going to make it 20 by 30, but I'm keeping the resolution at 200. Is that good enough to print? No. What's a good printing resolution? About 300, 300 or more. The reason why I'm going to keep this at 200 is because I'm not going to print it, and I want your computer to run fast enough. When you start getting huge files, things that are 20 by 30 inches, it's going to be a mega huge file, and if you've got a large resolution, it tends to lag your computer, and also it makes it difficult to upload. So I'm actually artificially keeping my resolution a little bit low. It's the only reason I'm doing that. We'll say okay. And let's go back down to our regular image. I'm not going to show you the editing of this photograph, but I'm just going to pretend like I've already edited it, and we're going to place our image into our working area. When we go out and take our photographs, here's what I want you as the photographer to keep in mind for your composition. You need to have some area above their head, so this is where we're placing your name, and you need to have some area open either to the left or the right-hand side of your figure, because this is where you're going to put your skills or your interests on there. Make sense? Keep that in mind when you photograph. You can photograph the whole person. You can have just the upper third of their body or the lower two-thirds of their body. You can cut them off wherever, as long as you've got place to place everything. Of course, if I wanted to scale this up, so there's that there. If you don't have any area, you can artificially create some area. So let's say I wanted to create a little bit more room to the left side of her. I can do this simply by scaling her up. Whoa, too much. Scaling her up and cropping off the right-hand side of her. This gives me a little bit more room to work with on this side. And you can find a little healthy balance. Obviously, I can't move her over without losing too much. But we'll lock that in from there. So that's our starting point. Here's the next thing. How do I cut her out and actually get my second image? The next step is I'm going to make a copy of my, I call it my back image. It's not my background. I don't want you to get confused with that. I'm going to copy my first image. You can drag it to a new layer. It'll always make a copy of it. I'm going to call this front image. And I'll turn off visibility of this one. To isolate her, we're going to use a layer mask. What's the advantage of using the layer mask?
It's non-destructive.
It's non-destructive. If I'm not erasing things, I can bring things back. The quickest way of doing it is to use your selection tool. I like to use the quick select and select your figure. Clicking and dragging over it. Since it is a large image, this may take a little bit of time to computer to think about. I specifically chose this image because her hair is going to give me a problem. I can select the outline of her because I can see the edge of it. There's a good contrast between her figure and the background figure. But when I get to the little wisps of hair, it's very, very small, fine details. And so this is going to be a little bit more challenging to create a mask on. If I wanted to quickly create the mask, so I've got my selection, I've got her outlined, she looks good. I can go at the very bottom of my layers and click on this icon to give me a masked out image. Everything in the background is taken away. You can see how it looks. All cool? Lost everybody? Cool. Follow along. Remember, if you want to refine your mask, so for instance, if I got up here and I wanted to paint in more area of this hair, I can grab my paintbrush tool, and anywhere that I paint black will erase away, and anywhere that I paint white will reveal it. Actually, let's get a smaller brush, maybe bring up my opacity. And so I can bring back that edge, or I can swap over to black at the X key to do that, and actually refine the look and feel of the edge of her face. You can spend a lot of time doing this. The issue comes with her hair. Her hair just doesn't look natural. It looks like it's cut out. This is one reason, if you did this in InDesign, you could get this looking good, but you couldn't get the small details. What we're going to do is we're going to refine the mask inside of our layer mask. To do this, hold down Control and click on the layer mask itself. One of the options is to refine mask, and it'll open up this dialog box. With this, I get my little cursor that acts like a brush, and the cursor is going to ask me to outline the area that I want the computer to look in. When I do, it'll look like this, and I'm telling the computer to look at that edge, look at those areas, and refine it. You can see in one click how it picked up the smaller bits, little stray hairs. Much faster, much quicker than I could do it. If I applied it to this area, and actually picked up this bits of her hair, when I let go, now it starts to look like this. Pretty cool? So very quickly, I can't do this to her whole image. It only really works best if you have small areas. I had students in the last class trying to paint over the entire person and try to find the edge of a person. It doesn't work that way. Now, it will pick up on some areas that are obviously not the edge, and it's not 100%. You can make your brush smaller. You can change the size of it up here, or use your bracket keys. But the main thing is you want to just kind of clean up those edges and make them look a lot better from here. As far as the rest of the options go, actually I'm pretty satisfied with what I have. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a little bit. It masked out that particular area. So when I say OK, give it a second to think about it, and it refined my mask from what I had before to this. Now I've got a back image and a foreground image. From here, this is where I can start to build out my layout and place things into it. If I was to grab my rectangle tool, this is where I can make a rectangle on this side. Remember, when you're working in vectors, your fill colors are up here at the top. So if I wanted to say, let's give it a blue, click and drag. Since this rectangle is in between my foreground and background, wherever I move it, since it's masked out, it actually works and looks pretty good. I could have the rectangle go all the way behind her. I could make it any size, or I could have it stop halfway through. We won't have to worry about the hair altogether. But I'll show you how to refine that. This is the essence. This is essentially what you're creating. I've got something behind her. I could put something in front of her. To do that, pay attention to what layer you're working on. So I've got my front image, anything on top of that front image layer. So if I made another rectangle, would obviously look like it's in front of the figure herself. All cool? Very, very simple things. Other little things to think about. So right now it still feels kind of flat. You can add drop shadows and slight changes in your gradients to give it a little bit more sense of depth. Here's what I mean by that. If I have this rectangle box, I've got the rectangle layer. If I was to add a drop shadow, that's just a simple layer mask. A simple little drop shadow, that little bit of difference, and you can play around with the opacity and the size of it, gives it that sense that the white bar, the white rectangle, is actually on top of it. I've got light interacting with this element and this element. If I did the same thing to her, let's say I wanted a shadow of her cast onto the blue area, I can select my front image. Let's add a drop shadow to her. If I start doing this, notice what I've got around here. It just doesn't look a little bit too natural. Now this side looks pretty good, but this area is something that wouldn't look too good. You wouldn't have a shadow casting onto the background. So this is something that you would want to play around with. Obviously that doesn't look good at all. Play around with the distance. Maybe you'd want to have the shadow cast in this direction. So if I was to bring it out some more, pull it away from one edge or the other. Let's give it a lower opacity. Still not quite satisfied with that. There we go. That's looking a little bit better. Very subtle on this edge, not so visible on this edge. We'll say okay to that. That gives me that sense of depth that looks really good for what I'm working with. When you add your name, I do want the name to be behind you, and I want it to be interacting, of course, with your picture. So we'll grab my type tool. I'm using my wife's name, Leah. Change up size, placement, color, position. If you've got a long name, you don't have to have it up at the top. Maybe yours can get away with rotating it, putting it off to the side. Do something fun with that. In this case, it's not going to work out too well. Let's see. We'll change up her color. Let's make it a little bit more. Play around with your blending modes. You don't have to be stuck with just how that looks. You can overlay things and play around with the look and feel of things. Let it be more or less subtle. I'll go away. I'm having fun. There we go. In this area, I want to add my skill set. Whoops. Picked up on that one. Skills. I don't like the pink. Maybe a darker version of the blue. List out a variety of skills. Photoshop. Do y'all know how to type out the bullet point? Give me a second, I'll show you. Bullet point, this works specifically on a Macintosh. The 8, if you hit Shift 8, that'll give you the star. If you hit Option 8, that gives you a bullet point. And so that's the quick and easy way of typing a bullet point to work with. Web, yada yada. You type in whatever skills that you feel. If you were to put it on your resume, things that you're good at, things that you're interested in, things that I'm purposefully leaving it open for you to interpret that. It's yours to create. Finally, in the box down below, I want you to add your contact information. Contact information can be anything from your phone number, your website address, email address, Twitter handle, whatever you want to place on there. Ivy at MC, oops, edu, yada yada, 601, da 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 da. You can place it from here. We'll go back to my original one. You can see the direction I want you to head in this one. Pretty cool. Very simple, easy technique. It's the kind of thing, like I said, you should be able to finish by today. But the main purpose of it is that you're looking at your composition in terms of depth. What can be in front of another thing, what can be behind it. This is another way of just having perspective. When we go out and take our photographs, if you can't achieve a very blurry background, I want to show you some other effects that you can add to your picture in order to give it that sense of distance or something that's, what am I trying to say, contrast between your foreground and background. Easy things to do would be to, let's say I had a blank layer. I can add a gradient of color in between my foreground and background. I've got a blank layer. Grab your gradient tool. One of the gradients you can use, the second one here, goes from whatever your foreground color, in this case blue, to transparent. And so if I wanted to add a blue gradient behind her, whoops, got to turn on my layer. So now I've got some little distance between there. Or I could add it to the top. It looks like she's kind of merging from the background. May not be the best thing for your particular layout, but you can always add or change up the way that would look as well. That's actually kind of cool. It's like she's being, it's like the bomb just went off and she's smiling about it. Okay, we'll take a break for now. This for you. What I want to do is I want to kind of blur it out and give me a little bit more contrast that way. I can do this now since I have my cutout on one layer and I've got my background on another layer. The easiest way of doing it, I want to blur the background and keep myself in focus, is to select that background layer, my back image. Under Filter, one of the filters you can use is a variety of different blurs. The one I just kind of gotten used to using is a Gaussian blur. It's very simple, very easy, and you got a little slider. The more you blur it or the less you blur it is what you can pay attention to. Now obviously if I go way too much, it's not going to look natural. As a matter of fact, if I was leaning up against a wall or if I have something in front of me, that would not be blurred out. It would actually get blurrier the farther back I go. But in this case, it actually works out that you can't see anything in front of me and you're focused more on the background. So I can get away with blurring it just a little bit more. Something, maybe not even that much. And that gives me more of a sense of depth. If your photograph has that and you want to have more contrast between the two, go ahead and cut out your image and then blur the background image. And that'll give you a little bit more contrast with that one. The other thing that I was trying to show you all, if you place something in between it, doesn't necessarily have to be a color, although colors can give you this kind of effect. So like place a blue and then change it to a different color mode, then swap up to another color. You can have something looking like that, little extra world that you're in and you're contrasting with it. Use the colors, however, that's native to the photograph that you have. Now I'm starting to introduce other colors and it just doesn't look necessarily too natural. That's pretty cool. I could use that as like a YouTube background or something. You see YouTubers do this kind of thing all the time with their little thumbnail. They'll cut it out. That's essentially what they're doing. The main thing is give yourself that contrast. Now you can do it by blurring it out for the background. I'll turn it back over to y'all and